This is Soul Mechanics, practical tune-ups to be a healthy human, and I'm your host, Kate Foley. Are you a people pleaser? Do you run late to appointments? Do you try to squeeze people into your day? Do you tend to have a lot of chaos in your life? Do you have difficulty squaring away time for yourself just to breathe? Do you feel as though other people take advantage of you? If any of these apply to you, you might be challenged with the need for establishing some boundaries. What do you think of when you hear the word boundary? A wall? A line in the sand? A firm word? A mean person? When the word boundaries come up, many people squirm. And often there's a lot of misunderstanding about what constitutes a boundary. Boundaries tend to make people squirm because it often involves confronting an important relationship or even an authority figure. There are consequences to establishing boundaries. One of those consequences is damage or loss of the relationship. But another consequence is a deeper, more dynamic relationship. Establishing a boundary with someone usually happens when one person does or says something that causes discomfort to the other person or to their way of life. Back when I was married in July of 2020, my husband and I were watching a movie. It was 8 o'clock on a weeknight during the COVID lockdown. A car appeared in the driveway and we were slightly alarmed because we weren't expecting anyone and we were also in the middle of a pandemic. His sister called him from the driveway and said, "We want to come inside to see your new addition." I looked at him perplexed, and I said, what? Absolutely not. Now you might be thinking, oh, this is a person who frequently visits, or this is a person who's very involved in their lives. And I'll tell you, no. This was an aberrant incident that required a boundary. We discreetly told her that we weren't comfortable with her and her husband coming inside because A, we were in our pajamas, B, it was 8 o'clock at night on a work weeknight. C, we were watching a movie. And D, no one was visiting anyone at that time because no one was really certain about how contagious this virus was. What did this boundary do? It caused an incredible amount of tension between me and my husband, and it also led to a confrontation between my husband and his family. His family, we soon learned, expected him to have no boundaries when it comes to family, even if it meant spreading a contagious virus. The subject of boundaries comes up a lot in my practice. The deeper-rooted and often avoided boundary usually appears with family rules, traditions, and expectations. When a boundary is crossed in a family with deep traditional rules and expectations, this often causes anxiety and a feeling of loss of control in people's lives. The unspoken or implied understanding is that should a family member confront this or lay down a boundary, they might lose their family. And in some cases, this is true. In other cases, it's a threat and causes fear and arguments. Every now and then, the boundary is respected and the relationship deepens. Establishing boundaries with a group like a traditional family can be troublesome. Most groups are able to stick together because of adherence to loyalty or tradition, not individuality. In tradition, what always has been, always will be. Tradition is often taught through ritual, repetition, stories, expectations, and loyalty. Tradition within groups can create safety and security. There can be a reassurance in knowing that what once was, always will be. Change is often a threat. Individuality is a threat. Personal boundaries are a threat. So just be aware that if you're establishing boundaries within a group, there is always the possibility that there will be some tumultuous response. There's a possibility that you might be shunned from the group, although there's a possibility that the group will respond with flexibility. But a flexible group will likely already have encountered and established rules for individual needs. This is more rare and takes conscious effort from each group member, but it does exist. You can typically tell if a group is flexible or rigid by your own response. If you feel fear about laying down a boundary with someone or within a group, you already have a suspicion about the reaction, and you might be dreading it. We all have these senses, and it's up to you whether you want to deal with those consequences or continue compromising your personal boundaries. When establishing boundaries, much like constructing a house, investigation and planning is in order. After all, houses are boundaries. Our living spaces are boundaries. The issue so many people have with boundaries is adhering to them. There are consequences to adhering to a boundary, and we all know this. People who lay down a boundary and adhere to it become reliable. You know where they stand. You know you can't cross a certain line, or they'll remind you. It doesn't have to cause a conflict, but if a line is crossed, there's usually a confrontation. And again, confrontation is not conflict. It's a face-to-face dialogue about a pertinent subject. People with strong boundaries tend to be strong people. They know themselves. They're comfortable with the word no, and they understand that the word yes is subject to some evaluation prior to being spoken. People with strong boundaries are comfortable with letting go. They know they have no control over someone else's reaction to the boundary. And let me tell you, those reactions vary. Some reactions I've received from establishing a boundary have been screaming and crying, questioning me, bargaining with me. Yet, some people respectfully back away from the boundary. People who are not used to boundaries tend to have very dramatic lives, and they also tend to not respect other people's boundaries. They tend to draw other people into their dramas. They tend to gossip. People without boundaries like to get involved in other people's business and wrap themselves in the middle of a dynamic. They tend to look for and find things that upset them. People with poor boundaries also tend to complain about how worn out they feel. Often, their health is compromised in some way. They don't know how to effectively confront another person because they don't know where to draw the line. And they certainly don't know how to maintain a boundary if they establish one. Think about one person in your life who consistently crosses a line with you. Everyone has someone. Maybe you already create boundaries with this person, or maybe you fear drawing a line in the sand with this person. Focus on this situation for a minute. How do you feel right now? Is this taxing in any way? Do you feel compromised? Are you giving up something to make this person feel more comfortable? Would you rather they behave in another way? How much are you dancing around their behavior? If you can be honest with yourself and admit that you are avoiding a confrontation, then think about the amount of energy you're pouring into avoidance. Your thoughts, your feelings, and your mere avoidance are all your vital energy. This is your health and your vitality. Now imagine confronting this person gently, kindly, and with respect, but confronting them and letting them know that they have indeed crossed a line, and you would rather that they didn't. When you're imagining this confrontation, remove the notion of the emotional consequences of the relationship, because again, you have absolutely no control over their reaction. This is about your vitality and you establishing a firm sphere. Here's the thing though. Most of the time when you establish an unflinching boundary with kindness, you might get a bit of a temper tantrum. You might even lose the relationship. That's always a possibility. But all of your relationships develop more quality to them. Once you begin to identify boundaries for yourself, you'll begin to notice people in your life who have strong boundaries and people with weak or non-existent boundaries. People with strong boundaries tend to attract other people with strong boundaries. Life gets a little easier because your decisions become more clear. Some things you just won't compromise. Some things are worth the compromise. Your decisions are more clear-cut because you won't fear the word no. You won't fear someone else's response to your request. Peacemakers tend to be a type of character with few boundaries. Now, there are two sides to every character. There's always an asset and a drawback. Some beneficial characteristics to peacemakers, a healthy peacemaker, is that they're typically supportive and very inclusive. They desire harmony. They tend to be in the center of it all to be sure harmony is maintained. They want to be in everyone's good graces. That takes negotiative skills and an open mind. But here's the shadow to this character. A dysfunctional peacemaker requires harmony. They aren't willing to confront anyone. So whatever group the peacemaker is involved in will find the peacemaker in the center, negotiating with group members to diminish their own feelings for the sake of harmony. Now, if you're someone whose boundaries have been crossed, and you're either upset or desiring to confront someone, your dysfunctional peacemaker will be getting involved to be sure that no feathers are ruffled. Shadow peacemakers tend to have a close relationship with denial. They don't like confrontation, and that includes confronting themselves. Now you're saying, okay, fine about the peacemaker. What does this have to do with boundaries? I'll tell you. When you have a character like the peacemaker, you have someone who doesn't like boundaries. Why? Because every time you lay down a boundary, it increases the chance of a confrontation. So you'll find your harmonizing peacemaker sweeping all of your boundaries under the rug. At first glance, this seems harmless, but over time, this behavior becomes more and more controlling. Over time, you begin to see that this peacemaker doesn't allow anyone to feel anything other than positivity or comfortable emotions. That's kind of oppressive after a while. I lay down boundaries in my practice. I have to because I'm a small business owner. No small business owner can successfully exist without boundaries. I show up on time, I'm conscious and present, and I leave my baggage outside the door. I expect my clients to show up on time and to be present for themselves and for the session. This is a boundary to which I adhere in many relationships. I make this boundary known through my cancellation policy. With my friends, I confront them if they cross a line or they don't respect my time. If I didn't maintain my boundaries, I'd feel aggravated and I'd feel like my time isn't valued. I could feel resentful. But if I create, communicate, and adhere to my boundaries, I don't feel anything personal. The dynamic feels very neutral. And I'm able to attend to my business and my relationships with complete attention and focus. Boundaries don't have to be severe. They can be simple. Saying something simply like, hey, you seem kind of distracted right now. I'm going to go home and we can talk later. This is a boundary. But the key to any good boundary is adhering to it. You don't have a boundary unless you adhere to it. So in this case, you go home. You don't let that distracted person talk you into staying with them while they're distracted. Also, a simple no is always a good boundary. Another boundary is yes, with stipulations. Don't be afraid of having stipulations. Something I've noted all my life is that people with good boundaries tend to be people who have established self-knowledge, self-awareness, and accountability. It's a beautiful thing. When you can state your boundaries clearly, you have the space and freedom to be present, to be fully aware, to be in control of your own sphere, and to enjoy the world around you because you know that you're the one making choices for yourself and for your life. This is Kate Foley. Thank you for listening.